Thank you again for joining the NEMSIS TAC Public Training. Today is Thursday, April 19th, 2018. This webinar is intended for all public EMS stakeholders. And today, Dr. Clayman will be sharing with us information related to the history of the revised trauma score as an injury severity measure and how it is valued, how its value is represented in the NEMSIS standards. And I will now turn the time over to Dr. Mann, who is the Principal Investigator for the NEMSIS Technical Assistance Center.
Great, thank you, Monet. It's a pleasure to be with you folks today. Thank you for taking an hour out of your day to spend with us. I'm incredibly excited to talk to you about NEMSIS version 3 and the opportunities that it provides us, specifically looking at the measurement of injury severity. In the pre-hospital setting, I think we do a pretty good job of kind of advertising and using other popular scales and scores such as a stroke score or a pain score. Trauma scores or injury scores are a little less well known and used, and I think version 3, with the ability to provide these scores at the national level, state level, and local level, I think will really enhance the value of these scores and their use. We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive today. I could probably fairly quickly walk through just a calculation of a couple of scores that are available in the NEMSIS version 3, but I want to do a little bit of a deep dive, spend the hour. It clearly will still be cursory, but I want to make sure that you walk away not only understanding how they're calculated, but also what are their kind of strengths and weaknesses and what scores may be better under certain circumstances. Really allow you to use these scores with some acumen, with some precision. So our learning of, yeah, it looks like it looks like you maybe not be seeing my screen anymore. Let me, Monet, are you still on the call?
Yes, I am. I apologize.
Okay, let's see if I can get the screen back. Are folks seeing my screen anymore, or just the bubbles with letters in them?
I see the bubble. Maybe you'll have to reclaim the presenter role.
Okay.
I don't know what happened.
Okay, can folks see the learning objectives again?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. All right, let's move forward. So we're going to be talking about measuring injury severity in the pre-hospital setting, specifically using NEMSIS, which is the national standard. At the national level, we're now collecting, last year we collected, or in 2016, collected almost 30 million EMS activations from 49 states and territories. So if we can calculate injury severity among our patients at the national level, at that kind of a level, with that kind of a census, it makes it a strong and valuable resource. So let's talk about how we calculate revised trauma score and the REMS score, and how both of those can be used to calculate the probability of a patient surviving. We'll also talk about some of the sub-scores that are kind of associated with those larger scores, for example, a GCS score, a Glasgow Coma Scale score. Many folks may be familiar with that score and its relationship to what's called an AVPU or an AVPU score. How those scores are used in concert to measure injury severity. And really, as we talked about at the beginning of this call, how they may be able to take the place of some severity measures that are now in use, for example, CABCO. There's some real advantages to replacing a number of those measures. Well, so let's begin by just kind of framing up our discussion together. Scale scores have to be both accurate and reliable, or sensitive and specific, depending on the terms you're used to. Let's kind of think about a marksman with a firearm who's shooting at a target. In the upper left, clearly the marksman and his firearm is neither accurate nor reliable. Upper right, there's some reliability. There's a tight cluster, but it's up and to the left, and so it's not as accurate as you'd like it to be. In the bottom left, we have increased accuracy closer to the bullseye, but the spread is pretty wide, so again, the reliability is in question. And of course, what you'd like to see is the lower right, where it's both a tight cluster, very reliable, and also on the bullseye, so it's accurate. So when we're talking about these measures, I'm going to just be speaking very superficially to kind of their reliability and their accuracy. We could spend the whole hour just talking about the differences among the scores in regards to those two concepts. To set the stage, let's begin with the last priority we talked about, and that was the CABCO injury scale that's commonly used by federal agencies to kind of estimate the severity of injury in traffic crashes. So CABCO is basically just a mnemonic, and I'm not sure how they came up with the letters. Clearly what they mean has kind of changed over the years, but K means that the occupant was killed in the car crash. A is an incapacitating injury. B is a non-incapacitating injury. C means that the occupant just may possibly be injured, and of course O is the occupant was not injured and is just property damage. So even as you kind of read through the meanings of those different letters, you begin to question the idea of reliability and accuracy when you look at what really is an incapacitating injury versus a non-incapacitating injury. And maybe a good example of that is I went to the website and just there is a comparison of how CABCO is calculated by different states, and so as a police officer approaches a crash, they calculate a CABCO score. So this is collected by law enforcement, and they collect based on the standards for their state. So I just pulled the first two states just off the list of their definitions for CABCO. And you can see just comparing Alabama and Alaska, of course it's pretty indicating that the crash has been fatal for an occupant is probably both accurate and reliable across all states. But even when you get down to A, so calculating an incapacitating injury, you can see the wide variability across states. So here in Alabama, an incapacitating injury means that an occupant had to be carried or helped from the scene. Compare that to Alaska, where an A score looks at really kind of anatomic injuries, right? So as you read through that, if a patient has a severe laceration, a significant loss of blood, broken or distorted extremities, crush injuries. So here you can see not only may these be very difficult to be both accurate and reliable, but also they differ across states in definition. So this becomes a very difficult national standard to be able to use because there can be such wide variability, and hence the need for federal agencies and others to have another mechanism of measuring injury severity, perhaps among providers who have a little bit more experience with kind of the medical side of severe crash or of injuries rather than our law enforcement. So let's talk about what is available and what issues. And when you're talking about injury severity scores, attempting to describe injuries, really the scales that are available to us basically fall into four categories. There's kind of a physiological measure such as a GCS or an RTS, and we'll talk about those in a minute. There's anatomical scores like the abbreviated injury scale or injury severity score. Those are calculated in the hospital because, as you can imagine, to get a really accurate and reliable measure of injury severity based on anatomical injuries, you really have to have the diagnostic tools, and the imaging tools to be able to calculate those correctly. Really, there isn't a lot of pre-hospital measures that rely on anatomical scoring. Then there's combined measures. The TRIS method is the most widely used across the entire globe in regards to injury severity measurement. We'll talk about what the TRIS is and why things like the revised trauma score that can be calculated in NEMSIS is so important for that measure. And then the fourth one I didn't list here is kind of proxy measures, right? We can look at mechanisms of injury and try to correlate that with the severity of injury, and the CDC and others have done that. We'll talk about that a little bit. Let's begin by talking about the physiological scoring that's available in NEMSIS that can help us to describe injury. So we'll talk about the GCS, we'll talk about the REMS score, and we'll talk about the RTS. Start with the GCS. This is a well-known score to our providers. The providers on the phone are certainly very familiar with this. It's a summary score, just where you add values together to come up with a score between 3 and 15. 15 being a good score for a patient. It's indicative of the level of consciousness of a patient, and basically a provider just assesses the ability of a patient to provide a verbal response or a motor response or be able to respond with their eyes. It's a great scale because it moves across care services very well. It can be collected in the pre-hospital setting, and then those values can be passed to the hospital, and it makes good sense to them. It remains reliable and valid across care services. It's well maintained. There's a new version, GCS 40 actually was released just a couple of years ago, so it's maintained by the industry. But it is only indicative of a level of consciousness. Let's move on and kind of talk about its sister scale that we mentioned just briefly that's also collected in NEMSIS. It's basically a simplified GCS. It's the AVPU or the AVPU scale. It basically is just a mnemonic. The patient is either alert or responds to vocal stimulation or just responds to pain, or the patient is completely unresponsive, and you just provide either an AVPU value. So it's more simple than the GCS. And as you can see over here to the right, I just provided a quick paper that did a comparison of standardized patients that were independently assessed with a Glasgow Coma Scale and then with a AVP or U across the x-axis. And these are just box plots here that are provided, and you can see the range of values of patients who received an A and then what their corresponding independent assessment of GCS was. And box plots are just kind of set up so that a quarter of all of the responses are here. Here's another quarter, here's another quarter, here's another quarter. They're called quartiles, right? So you can see what you can kind of walk away with here is that really an AVPU is really quite not very precise and is not very generalizable compared to a GCS because the range is very, very wide. So a GCS is clearly more both reliable and accurate compared to a GCS score. Well, let's talk about the two major scores I think that are collected in the pre-hospital setting at the present time. So the REMS score, the Rapid Emergency Medical Score. Here are the values that are collected, and it's much like a GCS in that it's a summary score. So if for age, for example, if the patient is 0 to 45 years of age, they receive a score of 0 for this one of 6 values. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 6. And once the patient is scored on each of these scales, these numeric representations are just summed together to provide a score. And then you can see how work has been done to kind of translate the scores from a REMS into the probability of survival. So over here on the bottom right and over the last column, you can see what is the overall mortality for patients that were scored with a REMS of 0 to 2. You can see the higher the score, the more likely that the patient will succumb to their injuries. And if you look at the scale, that makes sense, right? Age is the only one of the values that runs all the way up to 6, and so if you're more than 74 years of age, you'd receive a 6. The other scores only go up to 4, and you can see the more aberrant their physiologic measures become, the higher the score. So it's a good measure. It's somewhat complex. It's not a score that our EMS providers are going to calculate on their sleeve, but clearly software packages can calculate this and provide it to our providers as they're caring for patients, and they can pass it along to folks in the emergency department as they deliver patients. It has about the same predictability as the RTS, the Revised Trauma Scale, we're going to talk about in just a moment, which is more kind of hard-coded into NEMSIS. But all of these values are available in NEMSIS and is required to be collected on every patient who suffers, or is collected in the NEMSIS standard, actually. So the values for REMS could be available at the local level, at the state level, and also for national researchers as well. Let's talk a little bit about the Revised Trauma Score and how kind of similar it is or how it differs from the REMS. So the Revised Trauma Score only has 3 physiologic measures that are collected, so the GCS, systolic blood pressure, and the respiratory rate. It's coded kind of the same way, right? You just receive a coded value, and then you can add those codes together and come up with a score as to in regards to injury severity. Another way that the Revised Trauma Score has been used is it has been used in kind of an algorithm type approach, right? So there was a regression model that was kind of built where they took a lot of patients who had suffered some major trauma, and they looked at how predictive each of these individual measures were at predicting mortality, and then they weighted each of these values. So kind of simply, if you wanted to come up with an RTS based on this numeric, then you basically would just plug in the GCS value here, multiply it by this value, which is kind of a weight, and you can see you do the same thing for systolic blood pressure and for respiratory rate. Why this is kind of interesting to look at is because it makes it clear that for RTS scores, it's much more heavily weighted towards a GCS value than, for example, it is for respiratory rate, right? 0.9 is much higher than 0.2. That's kind of important to remember, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So the RTS score runs kind of differently, right? So the lower the score, the more severely injured a patient is compared to the REMS, which was the higher the score, the more likely that a patient was severely injured. So if you look at probability of survival here on the lower right for different RTS scores, which would come out of this algorithm here, so the highest possible score is a 7.84 and the lowest is a 0. And you can look at the probability of survival here on the y-axis, and so you can see the more the higher the score, the more likely you are to survive your injuries. Interestingly, there's been a fair number of literature that indicates if you have an RTS score of 4 or less, it's probably a good indicator that that patient needs to be taken directly to a level 1 or level 2 trauma center. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. But that's a brief introduction to the RTS, probably a little bit easier to use than the REMS. It's also a big part of TRIS, and so RTS is actually very widely used across the globe, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Kind of a downer kind of associated with all these scales that use weights is that they were based on what was called the Major Trauma Outcome study that was conducted in 1990. So the probability of survival is based on this population. You can just imagine the improvements that have happened in care since 1990. So the probability of survival in 1990 compared to 2018 could be very, very different. So I think all of these measures, the TRIS, the RTS, all of them that use these algorithms are probably very conservative estimates of mortality now. We really need to update the underlying population that these weights are based on. That's really important for us to fix. So let's talk about the TRIS a little bit. I think that's important because it really speaks to the value of our pre-hospital RTS score. So this is the most commonly used measure across the globe. Again, it uses a regression model. But what's kind of interesting here is you can see in this model you have these weights, and it uses a physiological measure. We talked about the RTS. It uses an anatomic measure that comes out of the hospital, and then it also uses an age score. So we saw age in REMS as well. So that's an important predictor of survival. But what's interesting here, right? So here's the RTS. We saw this. Here's that algorithm we saw. So it's the same value. So they're weighted, and then a value's put in there. But then it's weighted again, right, in this score. What's interesting is you look at this. So this is a pre-hospital RTS. You can see that the RTS score is much more heavily weighted on RTS than it is on ISS. And then, of course, probably the heaviest weight is applied to age. So it's interesting that even in the TRIS, the pre-hospital RTS is an incredibly important value for TRIS compared to ISS, and then, of course, age probably is the best predictor. But it's interesting that the value that we provide is incredibly valuable for TRIS. So those are the physiologic measures. So let's just talk briefly about anatomic measures. So as we mentioned, there's an ISS score, an injury severity score, and an abbreviated injury scale in the hospital. What's available in a pre-hospital setting? We really don't do a lot of work with anatomical scoring in the pre-hospital setting. Perhaps that's because folks feel like it's difficult for the providers in that kind of a setting with few diagnostic tools to be able to provide good estimates of injury severity. We do attempt to do it with the approved CDC and American College of Surgeons trauma triage criteria. Folks are probably well aware of this kind of 4-step scale where there's physiologic measures, and you can see them here. We're familiar with these. This is basically the RTS score. That if you meet these criteria or these criteria, which are anatomical, then it means yes, you need to go to a level 1 or level 2 trauma center. And then there's a step 3 and a step 4. I don't show step 4 here. It's kind of special considerations for patients. We'll talk about it in a minute. Here's kind of these mechanism of injury that we talked about. That's kind of a proxy, right? How far did the patient fall? You know, were there attributes of a crash? Was a patient ejected? And then if yes, these patients need to go to the highest level of trauma care that's available. Here is where we try in our measure to capture kind of an anatomical kind of estimation of injury severity for our providers. And you can see these are very visual processes where our providers should be able to be accurate and reliable in their estimations. So yeah, if a patient meets any of the physiological criteria or any of kind of the anatomical criteria, that patient needs to go to a level 1 or level 2 trauma center. So this is probably our only kind of estimation in the pre-hospital setting of a nationally recognized kind of injury severity score where we look at anatomy. Well, so that's a real kind of whirlwind look at the values that can be collected in NEMSIS that can help us in the future be able to better describe the severity of our patients' injuries. I'm going to actually go to the NEMSIS website and show you where these values actually come from. So I'm going to go back to my the NEMSIS website and show you exactly where you can look these up so you can share them with your colleagues. So if you're on the NEMSIS website, just at nemsis.org, you go over here to technical resources. Let's first pull up the version 3 data dictionary. And I'm going to just choose the web version of the data dictionary. This just makes it easy to go through all of the variables. And I'm going to start by bringing up the eVitals section of the NEMSIS standard. So here you can just see all of the elements that are that could be collected on a patient that are included in the NEMSIS standard. All those with a red letter N are mandated to be collected at the agency level, sent to the state, and then we collect that data from the state, and so it goes into the national registry. States can collect more, and EMS agencies can collect other elements. But as you look through this list, you can quickly see that clearly all the RTS variables are available. Here's systolic blood pressure, comes to the national level. Respiratory rate is available here. And then we have Glasgow Coma Scale here. We talked about the fact that pain scores and stroke scores are popular. Those are collected nationally. Here's the AVPU value. It's also collected nationally. We don't collect at the national level the revised trauma score because we can calculate it based on the physiological measures that are provided. So here's where you can kind of look and see what's collected and is available at the state and national level in regards to the physiologic measures. Well, where do we get the anatomical and kind of the proxy kind of mechanism of injury measures? Those come out of the e-injury section. So if I go to e-injury, all of the CDC criteria are captured in these two elements, e-injury 03 and e-injury 04. So if I click on e-injury 03, trauma center criteria, you'll see here is the combined all the measures that are listed as physiologically in the first step of the CDC criteria, or anatomically a reason to go to a level 1 or level 2 trauma center, or step 2 in the CDC criteria. And then steps 3 and 4 are found in e-injury 04. So if I go here, you'll find the mechanism of injuries, and here's some of the special indications for patients if a patient is pregnant or is on anticoagulants, if there's an EMS provider judgment that the patient needs to go to a trauma center, or if there's a burn. So all the criteria are included in the NEMSIS standard and are available nationally. So that can be incredibly helpful. Let's take a look. Let's go back to the website and let's take a look at how, just one example of how that data is being used. Let's go to View Reports. We'll go down to the Public Reports. Let's pull a version 3 dashboard. Let's look specifically at the motor vehicle crash dashboard that the NEMSIS provides. So let's see if this will come up relatively quickly. So this is a dashboard that is made available that allows the public to look at what type of motor vehicle crashes our EMS providers are caring for on a daily basis. And this gives you a good idea of the power of including an injury severity score in our measure. And so sometimes when I'm using Join Me Webinar, it has a hard time coming up. So I already opened it up, so I'm gonna move over to this tab. So here is the public crash dashboard. So you can see immediately that it includes almost 400,000 EMS activations associated with a crash. It includes EMS activations from almost 3,000 EMS agencies in 31 states and territories. Here you're able to look at the attributes of the crash, the race, gender of the patients, the time of the crash occurred. The data is basically real time. You can see we have data for March of 2018. You can look at different types of crashes here, and it's all dynamic. I do want to take you down here to kind of the lower part of this dashboard, though. Here is a probability of survival for these crashes across the country. So this value should now be pretty clear to you, right? So this is based on an RTS value, and you can find that out by going to the companion document here. That's the user's guide. I'll show that to you just briefly in a minute. But so here is the probability of survival for all of these patients based on an RTS score. And you can see here that a score of 4, you may remember, I'll just drag this back over, so a score of 4 gave us a 36% chance of survival from your injuries. So So here's the patients that probably should be transported to a level 1 or level 2 trauma center. And then here are those mechanism of injury CDC criteria that have specifically to do with car crashes. So here's an auto pedestrian crash, or if there was a death in somewhere in the vehicle, was the patient ejected, how deep was the intrusion into the car, and then whether or not like an OnStar value of injury severity could be recorded. So again, you can click on any of these values, of course, right, and then it will change all of the values here to just look at cars that had maximum intrusion, and then you can see the probability of survival for those patients. And so this becomes very, very valuable now, right? Because I think at the federal level and at our state levels and even for research, we have a good, accurate, and reliable measure of RTS calculated exactly the same way across the entire United States, available for us to look at the type of patients and the care we're providing to them across the country. So that's where those values are used in NEMSIS right now, and why they're so valuable. And so I will stop there and just ask to see if there are any questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Hi, this is Greg Scott with the International Academies of Emergency Dispatch. I had a question just about the scores in general. One of the criticisms I've heard of a lot of these different scoring systems is that the inter-rater variability, as it's used by the field providers, can be high. And I was just wondering if there's any studies out there, or you had any data that you knew of that looks at that, and are there any particular scales that show better inter-rater variability than others?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question, right? So there's really two issues here, and it speaks to what we had talked about earlier, both reliability and accuracy. So your question about inter-rater reliability kind of speaks to precision or accuracy, right? So will one provider kind of provide the same scoring compared to another provider? So there's inter-rater reliability and intra-rater reliability. So two different people assessing the same patient is intra-reliability. That speaks to kind of generalizability, right, or reproducibility. Are different providers going to scale the same person the same way? Inter-rater reliability is whether if a person saw the same patient today and then that patient or that provider saw that same patient, say, a year from now with the same injuries, would they have scaled it exactly the same? Has their change in skills or perception, would it change their scoring? So that's a great question. And I think these measures that rely on physiological values are fairly robust in regard to inter-rater reliability and intra-rater reliability, as you just mentioned. I think once we get into looking at kind of anatomical injuries in the pre-hospital setting, or attributes of the injury, so mechanisms of injury, I think those become a little bit less generalizable and a little bit less accurate. But there is some good literature related to both of those topics. I just haven't listed them here, but really, if you were to go on to Google Scholar or something and put in revised trauma score and inter-rater reliability, it will probably bring up a number of really good publications that could help you with that question. That's a great question.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay, we have a question from Steve, actually. I'll read it. It came across the chat. The American College of Surgeons asks us as trauma registrars to document mechanism of injury from NEMSIS, but very few agencies use this on their run sheets. Will there be a push for agencies to use these? Yeah, so that is a great question, Steve. Again, the NEMSIS standards, so what we provide here at the NEMSIS Technical Assistance Center is the standard, and we rely on vendors to build in the processes whereby values can be calculated, right? So as we mentioned here, we provide all of the, we're confident that every EMS run form should have the 3 physiological measures for RTS, because we mandate with this red end that they're collected. You can't provide a not value or leave it blank. You have to provide a value, but we don't require that they calculate RTS or the REMS, or the rapid EMS score. I think the software is getting better at recognizing the fact that it needs to have those values calculated and available on the run sheet. But we'll continue to push, Steve, to kind of let folks know that really if those summary scores could just be provided based on the underlying values, so there's no additional effort required for our providers, that really is something that needs to be included on a run form that would be passed off to, for example, a trauma registrar. Really good question. Yeah. You're welcome, Steve. Good question. Any other questions related to any of the scales? I know I went over them very quickly. I apologize. It was just a high-level look at what we'll be using in version 3 to describe injuries. Okay. Well, great. Well, we've ended a little bit early. I apologize for that. I moved through those slides pretty quickly. Hopefully, you have a better understanding of what we have attempted to do through the years, really starting back in the 1990s, to be able to correctly score injuries and their severity. And really, hopefully, we've made the point of the value of those scores being collected as early as the pre-hospital setting, and the value that they provide not only for an overall score for a patient, but as we track the care of patients through the different types of services, that it becomes incredibly valuable for us to determine, are we providing care primarily in the out-of-hospital setting and then in the in-hospital setting that improves the chances for survival for these patients. So really, our ability in the pre-hospital setting and the hospital setting to show value is based on data. And by providing these measures, we'll be able to do a better job than, for example, these older measures like CABCO at being able to describe our patients, therefore providing more precise information for research and for practice and for care standards. So we're incredibly excited to share with you what these measures will mean for us in version 3 and how we're beginning to use them. And feel free to contact Monet, who may still be away from her desk standing out in the parking lot of our building during this earthquake drill. Contact Monet or myself. Our contact information is available on the website, and I'll just show you where you can reach us. If you go to the NEMSIS website, we can be reached here with contact our staff. So feel free to give us a call. I'd be happy to talk to you more about any of these issues or other issues associated with the NEMSIS standard. So thank you very much for participating today.
Hello?
Hi, Monet. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. The drill is finally done.
Okay. Okay, good. And I think we got through it okay. I of course wasn't able to turn off the recording or anything like that, but I think it went well. I spoke a little faster than I anticipated, but I